that occurred over a long period of time, some cases 7 or 8 years. We're still at the evidence gathering stage, particularly for cases submitted in the last few weeks. Too early for us to reach even preliminary conclusions on the matters under review. This is a fact-based investigation involving complex information technology. It's important to allow all relevant parties to submit evidence on the matters under review. The 7 features that we saw on page 1, did you understand these to be established or findings by Second Sight at that point? Or is that to be qualified by what's said in this penultimate paragraph here?
I thought that they were things that required further work.
It seems that, in turn, what was said at the meeting caused concern with JFSA. And can we look, please, at Mr. Bates' letter of the 1st of April 2013, JARB 5049. This is a letter to you from Mr. Bates. He says, having had the opportunity to reflect on the meeting at Portcullis House, that's the one we're talking about, I thought it important to convey to you the concerns that both Kayla, Elle and I took from the Second Sight report and the briefing document they produced for the meeting. That's the one we've just looked at.
Yes.
Whilst every individual's case is extremely important to that individual, it's also doubly so in the weight that it adds to the systemic failures with Post Office and their Horizon system. These are issues which we at JFSA have been raising for years, and having closely worked with Second Sight over the last few months, we can see that they too have independently arrived at the same conclusions through their analysis of the cases. We can neither understand why Second Sight was so reluctant.
You've been watching the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry. This is our BBC News coverage. Now, you've been listening to Lord James Arbuthnot. Now, he is a Tory peer, but he was a Conservative MP and has been campaigning alongside the victims for more than 14 years. He's been detailing his correspondence with the government, the Post Office and the Royal Mail, because those conversations are crucial to understanding how what is widely seen as one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in the UK could have possibly happened, and who knew what and when. Now, it's worth picking out some of these key moments, and he has talked about Paula Venables, the former chief executive of the Royal Mail.
Well, we obviously have a problem with the sound from Azadeh Mashuri at the Post Office inquiry. As she was saying, they have been hearing evidence from Lord Arbuthnot throughout the morning. You can carry on watching continuous coverage from the inquiry on the BBC iPlayer, and all you have to do is scan the QR code that you can see on screen at the moment, and you will be able to pick up all of the latest from the inquiry. And indeed, we also have a special BBC News live page up and running, which you will find both Azadeh and our other correspondents who are at the inquiry are giving us their analysis of what has been said by Lord Arbuthnot and the other people who will be speaking later in the day. And you will find that information at bbc.co.uk/news, or if you have it, the BBC News app on your mobile device. Stay with us now here on BBC News. Coming up next, it is Lucy Hockings with BBC News Now.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Kazakhstan and Russia's worst flooding in almost a century forces tens of thousands of people from their homes. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says recognising a Palestinian state is in Europe's best interests. A review finds children have been let down by weak evidence about gender treatment, England joining a list of European nations limiting medical intervention. Arizona's Supreme Court rules that the US state can enforce a near-total abortion ban that dates back 160 years. And ending Ramadan in the ruins of Rafah, people in Gaza mark Eid surrounded by the rubble of their mosque. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to BBC News Now. 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. Nearly 100,000 people have been forced from their homes in Kazakhstan by what is being described as the worst flooding in almost a century. Across the border in Russia, entire towns are underwater. Tens of thousands of people from regions in the Urals and western Siberia have been forced to leave their homes. Now, this flooding has been caused by unseasonably warm temperatures that has melted the snow. And in the Russian city of Orenburg, very dramatic pictures coming to us from there. This is a city that's home to 500,000 people. The water levels there on the Ural River have reached what is being described as dangerously high levels. And that means thousands of people, as you can see here, are having to get out of the city. Now, Orenburg lies downstream from the city of Orsk, which was inundated when a dam burst last week. So dramatic pictures coming to us from Kazakhstan and from Russia. We're going to bring you an update on this story throughout the day. President Putin, we know, has been briefed on the situation there as well, and there is help being sent to those regions. But a dramatic situation that we will bring you more on coming up. To the Middle East now, though, where Israel is coming under increasing international pressure over how it's conducting the war in Gaza. In the past few hours, a string of world leaders have criticised the military operation. Spain's Prime Minister is one of them. He described Israel's campaign as disproportionate, saying that it threatened to destabilise the region and the world. President Biden as well says he believes that Benjamin Netanyahu is making a mistake and has called on Israel to agree to a 6 to 8 week ceasefire. Rishi Sunak saying the suffering in Gaza is intolerable. Australia has suggested that formally recognising a Palestinian state would strengthen momentum towards peace. We're going to bring you more on this story, but let's firstly hear a bit of that speech from the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. It happened a few hours ago, and he said that recognition of a Palestinian state is in Europe's geopolitical interests.
We were the ones who, when the conflict in Gaza started, demanded the European Union propose a permanent ceasefire, ensure the opening of permanent humanitarian corridors, and maintain support for the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. We also proposed an international peace conference and continue to defend the two-state solution as the only way for Israelis and Palestinians to coexist in peace and security.
So a strong statement there from Pedro Sanchez. Guy Hedgeko is our correspondent in Madrid. He gave us some more background.
He has been taking a similar line to this more or less ever since the October 7th attack and Israel's response to it. Today, Mr. Sanchez, once again, he condemned the attack by Hamas. He called for the release of prisoners, but he described Israel's response to the attack as utterly disproportionate. And as you said there, he talked about the need for Europe to acknowledge the state of Palestine. He said that without acknowledging a Palestinian state, there can be no solution to the Middle East conflict. And he said, as you mentioned there, this was in the geopolitical interests of Europe. He has been lobbying for this proposal around Europe in recent weeks. He said he's spoken to the leaders of Ireland, Slovenia and Malta, and he plans to speak to other European leaders about this proposal. And in terms of a time frame, he has spoken previously, not today, but previously has said that Spain would like to acknowledge a Palestinian state by July.
We're also hearing from Australia's foreign minister suggesting that they would also recognise Palestinian statehood, though Hamas would have no governance, no role in the governance of that. Penny Wong is their foreign minister, and she said the refusal of Benjamin Netanyahu's government to even engage on the issue had caused widespread frustration.
Recognising a Palestinian state, one that can only exist side by side with a secure Israel, doesn't just offer the Palestinian people an opportunity to realise their aspirations, it also strengthens the forces for peace, and it undermines extremism. It undermines Hamas, Iran, and Iran's other destructive proxies in the region. So I say to you, a two-state solution is the only hope of breaking the endless cycle of violence.
Penny Wong, there are lots to talk about in terms of diplomatic momentum and the pressure that is being put on Israel at the moment. But let's first give you a sense of what life is like in Gaza at the moment, because Muslims around the world, of course, are celebrating Eid. And we've seen those pictures already of people gathering, marking that moment in front of a mosque, the ruins of a mosque in Gaza. We can speak to Feda Majan. She is a displaced Palestinian living in Rafah right now. And I'm sorry to say that her 8-year-old daughter was drawing a picture when she was killed in an Israeli airstrike, that happening in October. I'm very pleased to see you, Feda. I'm very sorry for your loss of your lovely daughter, Habiba. How are you and the rest of your family doing?
First of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak about the situation of Gaza and the people of Gaza and Rafah. Actually, as you know, this is the first day Eid, Fitr Eid. We used to gather, we used to wear the best clothes we have, we used to have the best chocolate, and it were days of happiness and joy for everybody here in Gaza and in the Gaza Strip and Palestine. But unfortunately, this Eid is very different from any other Eid before. I'm speaking, I'm not, this Eid, it's not Fida Morjan that used to be in every Eid. I'm a defeated, sad mother who's suffering since 6 months because of the loss of my only daughter, Habiba. So you can imagine what is happening here. And no words can describe the very bad, horrible, miserable humanitarian crisis happening here in Gaza. We are talking about fear, injustice, oppression, sadness, a combination of very, very, very bad feelings. The people here are suffering from very bad humanitarian crisis. We are suffering from lack of food, appropriate food, lack of water. We are suffering from lack of medical treatment. You know that the hospitals are not working in an adequate way. They are working partially. Israel prevented the import of food, fuel, and the basic needs for Palestinians. We are depending now on very few humanitarian assistances. That's not even a very small part of the basic needs of the Palestinians in Gaza.
Feda, we were just seeing some beautiful pictures of your daughter, Habiba. Can you explain to us what happened 6 months ago?
Actually, on the 13th of October, Habiba was drawing in our home. I was making dinner in the kitchen. And suddenly, without any warning before, they bombed our neighbor's home. When they bombed the home, I flew a long distance from my place. Of course, the home was completely or partially destroyed. We have the rubble over us. Then when I wake up, I rushed up to search for my kids. I have 2 kids, Habiba, 8 years, and Omar, 4 years. So I started to search for them. I found Omar, but unfortunately, I didn't find Habiba. I didn't find her. I keep searching for her here and there, here and there. Some people came to rescue us. They said that they took her to the hospital, but they were lying to me because she was still under the rubble. I took my son Omar. We went to the hospital. Me, my husband, and my son were injured. And you went to hospital with no treatment, but I was screaming of my injuries. But I would like to say that the screaming was of my heart. It's not because of my injuries. It's because I didn't find my daughter. Habiba was the light of my. And when her teacher on the Facebook that Habiba was one of the most beautiful and cleverest girls and students she ever met. So if her teacher is telling this, what about me? I'm her mother. She has the most beautiful face in the world. She's the cleverest among her colleagues. She's the kindest girl ever. And she was drawing. She was drawing from the laptop. They killed her without any fault.
Feder,
I would like to say that, Habiba,
it is so heartbreaking to hear your story, and especially as you tell us this story on Eid as well. I just want to ask you what the situation is in terms of where you might go if there is an offensive on Rafah.
Actually, I was speaking about this with my brothers this morning. We don't know. We have no choices, actually, because they designated Rafah and al-Mawasi in Khan Yunis as the last place, as the last safe place in the Gaza Strip. If they announce offensive against Rafah, we don't know what to do, because it's the last safe place in the Gaza Strip. I think that the only option is to have a tent on al-Mawasi, on the sea, I don't know, but it's not safe at all, because when they designated Rafah and al-Mawasi as the safe places, they are bombing here. They are doing massacres here. They are destroying the homes over the heads of the people here. So I don't think that there is any safe place in this little spot of the world in Gaza. I don't know. I don't think. Do you know that before 2 days, the Israeli army announced that they withdrew from Khan Yunis? Khan Yunis, where my family is living there. I have 4 brothers. All of them have 4 houses. They built their houses stone by stone. All of their memories are there. And when the army withdrew from Khan Yunis, all of them rushed there to check their homes. Do you know that all of their homes are completely destroyed, razed to the ground? So if they are thinking to go back there, they have nothing to go there. It's not valid for living. There is no water, there is no buildings, there is nothing. So they have no place to go to. Even on a tent, they can't go there because there is no water, there is no basic needs that will help them to live.
Fedda, we are actually seeing pictures at the moment, as you tell us, about your brothers of Khan Yunis and of the rubble and the ruins of many people's buildings.
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on this day. Eid Mubarak to you and your family.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So heartbreaking to hear that story, but it does give you an idea of what life in Gaza is like on this very important day. But let's talk now about diplomatic pressure that is being put on the United States particularly, and the growing pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu as well. Let's join Nomi Bar Yaakov, who is an Associate Fellow at Chatham House and an international negotiator. Nomi, I'm sure you were listening to that interview that we just did, the growing chorus of demands from world leaders for a ceasefire, including President Biden, who had his harshest criticism yet of Israel. Where does this leave us? How close do you think we could be to a potential ceasefire?
Well, I think it's extremely disappointing that a ceasefire wasn't agreed on before the Eid. The hope was that there would be at the very, very, very least a cessation of hostilities for the 3 days of the Eid. And more likely it was hoped that there would be a 6-week ceasefire agreed commencing yesterday. And so we are in an extremely difficult spot at the moment, given that didn't happen, with very harsh criticism coming out, not only President Biden, but across the world, with His Majesty, the King of Jordan, writing an opinion piece with other world leaders in the Washington Post calling for a ceasefire. I mean, the fact that these leaders are making public their harsh criticism of, I say Netanyahu, because he is to a large extent to blame for the current situation and for the fact that the hostages have not been returned, which should be his prime responsibility and prime priority, and a ceasefire which would have allowed for adequate humanitarian aid to flow into the Gaza Strip. When I say adequate, I mean beginning of a flow. I think the flow of aid will need to continue to go on for years, but at least opening of more land crossings, which is the only way to get aid inadequately.
Nami, two of the developments today was Pedro Sanchez of Spain, also Australia, Penny Wong, the foreign minister there, saying that both of those countries are looking to formally recognise a Palestinian state. Does that actually change anything, those kind of words, diplomatically?
Well, they're not just words. I mean, that's actually action. I mean, recognising...
They haven't actually said when they're going to do it. That's the issue, I think.
Correct, Lucy, but the fact that they made a statement in public that they are going to do it is, I think, very significant. I mean, Sanchez spoke about the EU. I think it's going to be very difficult to get 27 member states of the EU recognising Palestine, and I think that's highly unlikely. But I think as individual states within the EU, they can decide whether they would like to recognise Palestine. Certainly, Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary here, has also made a statement last month that this is on the cards here, and it was a groundbreaking statement. It hasn't happened yet, but he certainly raised the possibility of the United Kingdom recognising the state of Palestine as part of a process, meaning first a ceasefire, release of all the hostages, and then that has to be done in conjunction with a regional plan, which would entail a Palestinian, not just the recognition of a Palestinian state, but the setting up of a Palestinian state within secure borders, contiguous, sovereign and viable. And as part of that, Lord Cameron mentioned that the UK would recognise a Palestinian state. For Israel, in turn, there would be, a withdrawal to the 67 borders or the agreed borders of this package, and normalization with Arab states like Saudi Arabia and others in the region.
Nami, always good to get your thoughts. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Lucy.
Children in England have been let down by a lack of research and remarkably weak evidence on medical interventions in gender care. Now, that's according to a new review. It was conducted by paediatrician Dr. Hilary Cass, who was asked to look at gender identity services for under 18s provided by NHS England in 2020. Whistleblowers had raised concerns about care at the only specialist gender clinic for children and young people in England and Wales. The report makes 32 recommendations on how services should operate. They include considerations around medical interventions, further research and safeguarding measures as well. England joins a list of countries that are reviewing treatments for gender dysphoria. In 2020, Finland's health agency recommended psychotherapy as the initial treatment for children with strict criteria for medical measures. In 2022, Sweden restricted the use of hormone treatments to exceptional cases, with health leaders saying risks were likely to outweigh benefits. And in the US, 22 states have total bans on under 18s being given treatment for gender issues, some of which would impose prison time on doctors and see parents investigated for child abuse. Hugh Pym has more for us.
Sonia wanted to transition from the age of 15, but she found she couldn't get access to care and was put on a waiting list. By the age of 18, she hadn't had a first appointment and was transferred to adult services. After hearing there'd be another long wait, she opted to go private until she could be seen by the NHS. Sonia says the long delays were hard to cope with.
All in all, I spent 4 years on waiting lists to be seen by an NHS specialist. It was incredibly frustrating, and the period between being told that, oh, we're not going to see you before your 18th, and being referred on, and then me gaining private healthcare was an incredibly dark period in terms of my mental health. It was the lowest I've been during the course of my transition.
Expanding gender services is a key focus of the latest independent review. Recommendations include a separate pathway for young children and their families, allowing early discussions to take place, a follow-through service for 17 to 25-year-olds, and assurances that the same standards of care as other parts of the NHS will be provided. Gender services provided by the controversial Tavistock Clinic in London ended last month. 2 new centres in London and Liverpool have been set up. The use of drugs to stop the onset of puberty has now stopped until further research is done. The author of the report says hormone treatment should in future be used with extreme caution for 16 to 18-year-olds, and argues that children were let down by the quality of services.
Well, I think it's very important to be concerned about a group of children and young people who are not getting the services that they need and they deserve in order to thrive and be well as they grow into adults. So I, of course, would hope that considerable note is taken of this report.
Kira Bell started taking puberty blockers aged 16 after being referred to the Tavistock. She then took legal action, arguing she wasn't challenged enough at the clinic and regretted her decision. Her lawyer responded to the review findings.
Whilst it is very reassuring for young people who are going through gender questioning at the moment and their parents, that hopefully there will be a new service developed that will meet their needs appropriately, it is unfortunately for many young people too late. They live with the ongoing consequences of poor clinical treatment and their lives forever changed.
For Sonia, the priority now is for the report's findings to be implemented, for more resources to be provided, and for calmer and fairer discussions around gender and identity. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Birmingham.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's take you to the US. A day after former President Trump said abortion should be left for individual states to decide, the Arizona Supreme Court has revived a near-total ban on abortion that dates back 160 years. The law bans abortion in all cases except when the mother's life is at risk. It also makes providing a termination or helping a woman to obtain an abortion punishable by 2 to 5 years in prison. Democrats and some Republicans have publicly condemned the court's ruling, which comes into effect in 14 days. Arizona's governor urging people to use the democratic process to reverse the decision.
This November, Arizonans may have an opportunity to make their voices heard on this important issue. To the people across Arizona who are concerned about the future of abortion rights in our state, who are worried about their bodily autonomy, who don't want to see the freedom of their wives, sisters, and daughters restricted, you can make your concerns known at the ballot box, and I encourage you to do so.
Let's take you live to CBS correspondent Jared Hill, who joins us now. Jared, I see there has been some criticism as well in Arizona from leading Republicans. Just take us through the reaction to this law.
That's right. So it's been interesting here because you do have Republicans and Democrats alike criticizing this law and saying that this is not something they believe should be on the books. One of the Republicans that we've been hearing from is Carrie Lake. She is running for Senate there in Arizona, a Republican, a conservative Republican, who is now urging the state's governor to try and find a way to, as she says it, put forward some sort of common sense solution to this issue, even though, again, she is someone who has been canonically pro-life in this situation, or at least anti-abortion rights on this issue as well.
You see these pictures and we know how passionate many people are about this particular issue. So with Arizona being a key battleground state, Jared, how influential do you think people's opinions on abortion are going to be when it comes to them voting in November?
So when it comes to voting specifically in Arizona, we do know that at least in 2022, 6 out of 10 Arizona voters believed that they should have a guaranteed access to legal abortion nationwide. And so that's something happening in the state there. when it comes to nationally, this abortion issue, the abortion rights issue, is something that we're seeing taking hold across the country. As you mentioned, just earlier this week, former President Donald Trump said that this should be a states' rights issue. And you have Republicans trying to run on that issue, trying to run on the idea that this should be something that they should vote for within their states. But then Democrats, both from the presidential ticket on down, are saying that if they are continue to be voted into office, that they would try and cement this as a federal right. And so again, this is something that we are really seeing bubbling up as a significant issue come November.
Jared, thanks so much. Let's just take you back to some remarkable pictures that we're getting out of Gaza as Muslims around the world hold Eid prayers. You can see these worshippers who have gathered to hold prayers for Eid by the ruins of a mosque, which is in Rafah as well. This was a mosque that we understand was destroyed in February during an Israeli offensive, but there are so many Palestinians, more than 1 million of them now, who are sheltering right there in the south in Rafah after being forced to leave their homes. And we can see these drone pictures as dozens of worshippers gather to hold prayers for Eid. This is something we're going to be talking more about coming up in the next half hour, so do stay with us.
Hello again. It's been a pretty wet start to the day in some western areas, and that rain is going to be steadily pushing eastwards, accompanied by brisk winds today. It's courtesy of this weather front here. It's a warm front. It's bringing in the rain. You can see from the isobars that the winds are going to be brisk as well. But behind this, we're also pulling in some milder air from the Atlantic on this southwesterly wind. And that will eventually push across all areas as we go through the course of today, tonight, and into tomorrow. But after a bright start in the east this morning, the rain's already been gathering. Some of that's heavy and persistent, particularly so across western Scotland, the cloud building ahead of it, and then behind it for the rest of England, Wales, and also Northern Ireland, it's going to be fairly cloudy and murky and dank. So some heavy rain across the west of Scotland and persistent rain at that, 20 to 40 millimetres, quite widespread, double that with height. For Northern Ireland, cloudy this afternoon, quite murky, highs of 16 degrees. And here's the rain continuing to drift eastwards across the rest of England. Now that will eventually clear. Then more rain comes in tonight from the northwest. It's also sinking southwards and it will get down into the far south by the end of the night. But it is going to be a mild night, 6 to 12 degrees. So that leads us into tomorrow. Tomorrow, we've got the dregs of this weather front across southern areas, still producing some clouds, still murky around the coasts and hills in particular. But for the rest of the country, it's going to be largely dry. And in fact, the early cloud will break and we'll see some decent lengthy spells of sunshine. But it is going to be quite a breezy day, but it's also going to be a mild day. That breeze still coming from the southwest. We've got highs 11 to about 20 degrees. Then as we move on through the latter part of the week into Friday, again, a bright and a breezy day for the most part. There'll be some decent spells of sunshine, but some showers coming in from the west, and they will be affecting parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures 20, potentially 21 degrees by the time we get to the end of the day. Then note how with weather fronts crossing, it remains unsettled, but the blues return to the charts. So that means as we go through the weekend into the early part of next week, it is going to turn that bit cooler.
I just felt this tightening in my stomach. Where do I need to go? How can I get there?
Rescuers are using their bare hands to search desperately for survivors.
In a lot of the stories that we tell, they can be so bleak. People here wonder if they can ever rebuild. You need to show some hope.
So this is what an exodus looks like. My coping mechanism at the time was to not think further than an hour ahead.
My job is investigating bad stuff that's on social media. I know by doing this interview and sharing it, I'll probably get more online abuse. My job is to expose how people are targeted because I'm a reporter who can do that.
At the end of the day, a proclamation of a new king is actually the moment to be looking forward. And that tempered the way that I covered the story.
Everyone ready for that proclamation of a new king. Hip, hip!
Behind the Stories. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Be ready. Change can happen in an instant. Check on the BBC Weather app.
This is BBC News, the headlines. Kazakhstan and Russia's worst flooding in almost a century forces tens of thousands of people from their homes. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says recognising a Palestinian state is in Europe's best interests. A review finds children have been let down by weak evidence about gender treatment, England joining a list of European nations limiting medical intervention. And Arizona's Supreme Court rules that the US state can enforce a near-total abortion ban that dates back 160 years. Muslims around the world are marking Eid, one of the biggest celebrations in the Islamic calendar, with prayers seen here in Istanbul. Eid means the festival of the breaking of the fast, and it marks the end of Ramadan. We can show you some services taking place, this one in Kosovo, and prayers too at mosques in the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur. Taking you to Qatar now, where thousands marked Eid in one of Doha's World Cup stadiums, with prayer mats, as you can see there, just spread right across the pitch. And to the skies over Gaza now, the largest airdrop of aid since the start of the Israel-Gaza war. 14 aircraft from 9 nations delivering tons of food, water and aid. Saba Ahmadi is a young imam and an influencer at the UK's largest Muslim place of worship, the Batul Fatah Mosque in Morden in South London. He's documented his preparations for Eid on social media.
Don't be shocked, but this is my new favourite thing to do, to fix the chairs in the kitchen. Basically, Mum said to me, you've not been home for so long, right? Make yourself useful. Because tomorrow's Eid, which is being celebrated by millions of Muslims across the world, it's the celebration that happens after the month of fasting. Of course, Mum is in charge of the food. She's making a meatball curry, and tidying up needs to happen because everyone's coming to our house. The hoovering needs to happen. That's already clean, right? I don't know why I'm hoovering it again. Anyway, also my job is to blow up the balloons for the kids, because that's basically what I'm good at. Eid Mubarak, guys. And what are you doing for tomorrow?
Really pleased to say that Saba joins us now from Manchester. Eid Mubarak, Saba. Oh, I'm not quite sure. Are you muted, Saba? Have you got us now?
I've got you now.
Ah, good to see you. And really good to see your preparations for Eid. But we've just been seeing pictures of an airdrop of aid over Gaza, and also of people praying in the ruins of a mosque in Rafah. And speaking to my neighbours yesterday, they were saying how difficult Ramadan has been for them, and also for Eid. They haven't properly been able to feel joyful because of the pain that Palestinians are suffering at the moment. Is that a common feeling? How has that changed this Ramadan and Eid for Muslims around the UK?
Yeah, I think it's something which Muslims have been feeling. It's that pain that, look, the loss of any innocent life, whether they're Muslim, Christian, or Jewish faith. An innocent life is an innocent life. And look, as a Muslim, Islam teaches us that we have a duty to protect everyone of faith, including places of worship, including mosques, churches, and synagogues. So it has been difficult Ramadan. It's been a heavy one. And even yesterday, I was posting on social media that it's important that we don't forget those people who are less fortunate than us, and people's Eid will be different this year compared to previous Eids.
You've taken part in some amazing interfaith events throughout the year, though. How has that been?
It's been really important. As a Muslim, Islam teaches to take part in interfaith events, and that's what motivates me to do what I do. I think it's really important that we have conversation and dialogue to bring communities together, because that's one way to achieve global peace and justice. You can't fight fire with fire. But to talk to people, to hear their views and opinions, and to bring people together in one room and to listen to what they say is really important.
Saba, this won't come as a surprise, perhaps, this question I'm about to ask you, but how old are you?
I'm 30.
So I think that a lot of people's perception of an imam is someone slightly older, and I wonder if that's why you're having such an impact and such an influence on social media. How did all of your videos and things come about?
So I literally was sat in a tea shop one day in Tooting, and my friend said to me, look, you know what, release someone on social media who gets it. So I thought, let's take the leap of faith, and I jumped on social media, and I just try and show what life is like as a Muslim, as an imam, as a father, as a husband and a son, and just to give people an insight as to what life is like. look, a lot of people have misconceptions and are scared of Muslims, but I try to use my social media platform to remove misconceptions of Islam, to show them what life is like, and to try and create a safe space for conversation and dialogue so people can come and ask questions about Islam. As to maybe other places where they don't feel comfortable, they can come to me and ask any question they like.
Some of your videos are really successful, over 1 million views, and you're right, lots of people asking questions which you were able to answer for them. So on Eid, what is the most important thing, do you think, for people to remember or know?
I think there are 3 factors to Eid for me. I think number 1 is gratitude, being grateful to God for allowing us to fast for his sake. Number 2 is a time of reflection for many Muslims across the world, bearing in mind the current conflicts that are taking place. And number 3 is a time of celebration. People take time off work, families come together, and they sit around the table after the Eid prayers, and they sit and have food and have a laugh.
Really good to speak to you, Saba. I hope today is joyful for you and your family. Thank you. Well, here in the UK, 5 people have pleaded guilty to stealing more than £50 million. That's $63 million from the UK's welfare system. The gang made thousands of fraudulent claims for a social security payment known as universal credit. Prosecutors describing it as the biggest case of benefit fraud ever brought before the courts in England and Wales. Michael Buchanan has the story.
This is some of the almost £54 million stolen from the welfare system. 2 of the gang treating taxpayers' money like confetti, celebrating their role in one of Britain's biggest benefit fraud operations. Investigators found £750,000 in cash in one of the gang's homes.
This was a sustained attack on a system that is supposed to protect the most vulnerable in our society. But instead, this gang used it as a cash machine to fund their lavish lifestyles.
The group of 3 women and 2 men are all Bulgarian nationals. They operated out of the Wood Green area of North London for a 4.5-year period before their arrest in May 2021. The gang made thousands of fraudulent claims for universal credit, forging documents like tenancy agreements to support either real or stolen IDs. If a claim was rejected, they'd simply reapply, sometimes repeatedly, until it was granted. Stealing so much money for so many years raises serious questions for the government. When universal credit was introduced, the government said it had been designed to reduce fraud in the welfare system. That simply didn't happen. Fraud increased and billions of pounds were lost annually. The Department for Work and Pensions said the gang had used a sophisticated combination of legitimate and fake documents to make it appear that they were eligible for benefits when they were not. The gang are all due to be sentenced next month. Prosecutors will also attempt to confiscate as much money and other assets as they can. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
In the US, the parents of a teenage schoolboy who killed 4 of his classmates in a school shooting in 2021 have both been sentenced to at least 10 years in jail. In the first case of its kind, Ethan Crumbley's parents, James and Jennifer, were found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. John Sudworth has more.
Neither James nor Jennifer Crumbley pulled the trigger, but in a country where gun violence in schools is all too common, this was a legal first.
It is the sentence of this court, Ms. Crumbley, that you serve 10 to 15 years with the Michigan Department of Corrections.
The 2 now face at least a decade in prison for involuntary manslaughter as a result of the mass shooting carried out by their son. In 2021, they bought Ethan Crumbley, then 15 years old, a semi-automatic handgun as an early Christmas present. A few days later, he took it to school in his backpack and shot dead 4 of his fellow students. Last year, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But prosecutors claimed his parents also bore responsibility, arguing that they had failed to keep the gun secure and that they had been indifferent to the clear warning signs of their son's deteriorating mental health, with his diary entries suggesting they'd ignored his desperate pleas for help. And as she sent them to jail, the judge agreed.
But these convictions are not about poor parenting. These convictions confirm repeated acts or lack of acts that could have halted an oncoming runaway train.
Gun control campaigners hope the long sentences handed down will resonate across America in any home where children live in close proximity to guns. They were certainly welcomed by some of the relatives of the victims.
Ultimately, the responsibility was in their hands. They are the parents. They are the ones that control their son, and they have the power to do what needs to be done, and they didn't do that.
Legal experts caution that one case will do little to stem epidemic gun violence, but those frustrated by the lack of political action may take some comfort in the message being sent by a US court. John Sudworth, BBC News, New York.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. With just over 100 days to go until the Paris Olympics, there are concerns that the triathlon event could be delayed or the swim leg even cancelled because of poor water quality in the River Seine. That's despite more than €1 billion spent trying to improve it. Well, let's take you to Paris now. We can speak to our correspondent Hugh Schofield, who is there on the banks of the beautiful River Seine, except it's still a bit polluted, Hugh. What kind of levels are we talking about? What's happening in the river?
Well, I mean, the big picture is a good picture. So it's a positive picture. The big picture is that the river has been cleaned up extensively over the last 20, 30 years. It's far, far healthier than it was in the 60s when there were 3 species of fish left in it. Now there are 30 or 40 species of fish. So the general picture is a very good one, but the specific picture is rather more worrying. The specific picture is this bid to get the river swimmable in by the Olympics, which was a commitment that the Olympics organisers, which President Macron made, and which they insist is still on track. But there have been now these findings from an NGO which looks into water quality, which are troubling. This NGO called Surfrider has found that in a series of readings it took over the winter, the bacteria levels are too high. They're above the norms, and it's all scientifically kind of organised. Above a certain level you can swim, below a certain level you can swim, above you can't. And the levels were above that level. So there are assurances coming from the organisers saying, don't worry, winter water is worse than summer water. There are all sorts of things that have yet to happen which will continue to clean up the river in time. But one can't help thinking that they must be worried, and in the same way that there are concerns expressed about the opening ceremony on the River Seine and security, people are now saying perhaps there should be a plan B in case the water isn't clean enough by the end of July.
Because, Hugh, is there a plan B? Is there an alternative venue for the swim part of the triathlon?
I think the plan B, as I understand it, I mean, there are 3 events. There's the triathlon, there's the swimming marathon, and then there's the Paralympic triathlon as well. So 3 events. As I understand it, the fallback plan, if things go badly wrong, is that they can shift the date. They can move it around. They planned it to take place early in the games, and so if early in the games and they last for 2 weeks, it looks like the river is not up to snuff, then they'll push it back later. But if that doesn't work, I don't think there is another plan. And of course, that's why there are all these assurances that they have things under control. But, I think anyone watching is feeling a little niggle now that maybe they're talking confident, but they're not as confident as they look.
Yes, a mild sense of panic, I'm sure, with just 100 days to go. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us from the banks of the Seine. Polls have now closed in South Korea's parliamentary elections. We have exit polls already. They are predicting a landslide win for the opposition party. The Democratic Party and other opposition groups are projected to win about 2/3 of the 300 seats in Parliament. They've confirmed the result would be a blow to the People Power Party of President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was elected in 2022. Jean McKenzie has more details from Seoul.
The first thing to note is that exit polls in Korea are unreliable. They have been wrong in the past, and they don't take account of the early voting that's been happening here over the past week, and so we don't want to read too much into them. If they are correct, though, it means that the Liberal opposition party is on course to win a significant majority in the parliament. These elections, although just parliamentary elections, they don't decide the president. They are being seen as a midterm referendum on the current president, Yoon Suk-yeol, who's been in office for 2 years now. Now, he has been unpopular from the start, but neither side expected him to be punished this much. If his party does lose in a big way, it will weaken his authority and make it nearly impossible for him to be able to push ahead with his agenda and pass legislation. The big number that everybody is interested in is 200. This is what's needed to get what's called a supermajority here. And it means that if the opposition party and the smaller parties get 200 seats or more between them, they can join forces to push through laws the government doesn't want. The president will no longer be able to use his veto, and that could make politics here pretty chaotic. But we will have to wait until the morning here in Korea to find out the results for real and what they mean. But they could have big implications for how this country's run over the next 3 years.
Jean McKenzie there. A new Amy Winehouse biopic, Back to Black, is hitting UK cinemas this week. The film is directed by Sam Taylor-Johnson and it tells the life story of the singer who died from alcohol poisoning in 2011. It's had mixed reviews, to be fair, with some critics calling it an unfair portrayal of the artist. Well, with me now is photographer Charles Moriarty, who shot photos of Amy Winehouse when she was still a relatively unknown talent before the release of her debut album, Frank. Good to see you, Charles. Firstly, for our viewers around the world, in the UK, everyone's still obsessed with Amy Winehouse. It's international as well, but what is it about her, do you think makes people so interested still?
I think her music struck such a chord with people and there was such a deep connection there that losing her at such an early point in her career was devastating to so many people who knew her through her music, knew her soul essentially, because that's really what she gave to people. And I think it's hard to move on from that. Some people want to keep holding on to it for forever, really.
And they can in some ways by looking at your photos. Tell us the remarkable story. You were both so young when you took these shots of her.
Yeah, I was straight out of college. I wasn't a photographer, really. I was 21, and the day I met Amy, we shot the album cover for Frank in Spitalfields in London, and then later on went and spent 24 hours in New York together, where we shot another series of images which until around 2017 weren't seen by anyone. I'd held them a little close to my chest. But yeah, it was a really beautiful time where we were really both kids and trying to figure out where we were going.
No idea what was to come.
No clue what we were doing, really. I mean, a lot of the time I was pulling on an art history background to sort of figure out what shots to take. And I think what really happened was that we bonded over just trying to create together. And it allowed her to be herself and me to figure my way through it.
And when you say she was able to be herself, what was she like?
She was wonderful. She was a lot of fun, you know, and I had a great music taste, obviously, so you could put on anything with her and it would be wonderful. And just great conversation. We had a shoot planned in New York, which got rained out, and we ended up actually getting stuck indoors all evening, which sort of led to drinking wine, eating bad Chinese, and just talking about our own lives and figuring out each other, and it led to that.
But it's a Kickstarter campaign that's got these photos out there now. I mean, what have you just been sitting on them for this time?
I wasn't sure what to do with them, and it was only when I met Asif Kapadia and then saw his film Amy that I really wanted to show the Amy that I knew to everyone else. I think that the images in Before Frank are really, I guess they're intimate, they're friendly, they're her as she was, or at least as I like to remember her. And I kind of felt after I'd seen the documentary that the body bag image coming out of the house at the end really left me quite, upset and cold. And I really wanted people to remember her smile and her laughed, you know.
Must have been hard, Charles, to watch her decline.
Yeah, I tried to stay away from the tabloids as much as possible, to be honest, and it was really quite shocking still when that phone call came through. But yeah, she was incredible. So you know, it was very sad to see that happen.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, just sharing some lovely thoughts, memories, insights into Amy Winehouse. Thank you. There's been a major development in the world of sport because we have heard from the governing body of World Athletics that will become the first international federation to award money to medalists at an Olympic Games, which has been traditionally an amateur event. Competitors who win gold in Paris this year will each receive $50,000. A $2.5 million prize pot has been ring-fenced from the International Olympic Committee's revenue share allocation, which is received by World Athletics every 4 years. Matt Graveling explained to us why this is such a significant moment.
It's fair to say some of the better known athletes do get money, but in terms of sponsorship deals and things like that, the Olympics itself has always been seen as amateur event, as it were, by name only. But with regards to prize money, there hasn't been a prize pot until today, and this has really only come out in the last couple of hours from World Athletics, and they of course look after all the track and field events at the Olympic Games. And they've said they've ring-fenced $2.4 million, and this is to basically provide a prize fund for the gold medal winners, just the gold in Paris, which is only 107 days away. Put it on your calendar. But of course, this is new news for us here. They've come out with this today, and they've basically said that they want to put more money back into the sport, to the athletes themselves. And this money has come from the International Olympic Committee, who get money from broadcast, and they then will funnel this down to the different sports federations. And the World Athletics have said, well, we're going to do something which has never been done before, and we're going to, for every person who wins a gold in track and field in Paris, £50,000. This will have to be ratified, and what I mean by that, Regina, is if an athlete then fails a drug test, in the same way they would have to return a gold medal, they will also then have to return their $50,000. And then in LA, which is 4 years from now, 2028, they've committed, World Athletics, to also providing money for the second place, the silver place finish, and also the bronze place. They haven't told us how much that money will be, but that's something they say they are committed to do.
More from our sports teams in Salford on that story throughout the day as people react to the prize money now being given out. To Germany now, though, where one of the largest art museums has sacked a member of staff after he smuggled one of his own paintings in and put it on display. The 51-year-old man hasn't been named. He is reported to have worked as a technician at the Pinakothek de Moderne in Munich and had out-of-hours access to the building. This is a story that has been well read on the BBC News website, so let's bring you some perspective on it with Joanna Adams, who is an art curator at Bundeskanthal, a gallery in Germany, which has had a similar situation. This is very popular, the story. People are so intrigued by the fact that someone would do this. What happened at your gallery, Joanna?
So that was last year. We had an exhibition on, the title was Who We Are, reflecting on a country of immigration. So it was quite a match that actually a painting immigrated illegally, in that case, to our exhibition. So that is what happened last year.
And what happened to the artist? Because in this case, we understand that his employment has been terminated and he's been banned from even coming into the gallery.
Yeah, so when we found out about that secret immigrant to our exhibition, that small painting, we started a call out on social media asking who the artist was, and that we are very curious to learn more about him or her. So that from then on, it went pretty quick. So she answered, Dana Emanuelidis, and she was a young student, not an art student, funny enough, a student of the law. So yeah, she was more of a hobby artist, but she engaged very much with the issue that we were dealing with in the exhibition, and that was how people experience being othered in society, actually everyday racism in society. So what she did, she painted a model, an Australian model, who herself said that she always makes the experience to be considered like something else than like other people. So that was something the artist wanted to address also in our exhibition, and we found that very interesting.
And just very briefly, what has happened to that picture?
So the picture, together with the artist, we decided to bring it to an auction for an initiative in Germany that helps artists who had to flee their countries, so young refugees and artists in residence here in Germany. So we decided, as our institution doesn't have a collection on its own, that it should go, maybe to a person, a collector who's interested.
So it's a happy ending. Joanna, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Hello there. It got quite cold last night as the weather briefly calmed down. Things are going to be warming up over the next few days, but at the moment we've got all this cloud streaming in from the Atlantic. Those two weather fronts bringing spells of rain, but the wind direction is changing. We're getting a southwesterly wind, and that will bring in that warmer air. Now today temperatures aren't going to be too high because we've still got a lot of cloud around, some fog over the hills, but 14 or 15 is an improvement on yesterday. Still have the rain, and the rain is going to be heavier across the hills of western Scotland still for a while, but that second rain band will push its way southeastwards overnight, the rain becoming light and patchy. And we'll see clearer skies following towards the north. But we still have that southwesterly breeze, so it's going to be a lot warmer than it was last night for many parts of the country. Temperatures are going to remain in double figures. And tomorrow sees more sunshine around as well. Some early rain in the far north of Scotland clears. A few spots of rain through the English Channel and southernmost parts of England and Wales. Could stay a bit cloudy. Next area of rain arrives in southern Ireland, but across the UK it's probably going to be dry in most places. And with some sunshine around in that southwesterly breeze, it will be warmer. Temperatures back up to 19 or 20 degrees. But there are some more weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic once again. They are going to return northwards, take more cloud and some wet weather northwards as well. So we'll see some rain pushing towards Northern Ireland and into Scotland, maybe even northern parts of England. Further south, after a bit of a cloudy start, we should see the cloud thinning and breaking and some sunshine coming through. And we still have those warm southwesterly winds. So these are the temperatures we're looking at on Friday. Let's compare those with the average for this time of the year. So Bury St Edmunds, 20 degrees on Friday, 6 degrees warmer than normal. And at Aberdeen, it's a similar sort of story, 6 degrees warmer than normal. A pleasant day for many areas on Thursday and into Friday. Over the weekend, though, it will start to cool down again. The wind direction changes. Cooler air is going to push down from the northwest. Pressure is going to be falling as well. And with low pressure moving in, we're going to find more wet weather coming in from the northwest as well. Now, the fine weather will last throughout the weekend across southeastern areas of the UK, but even here it will turn cooler. Towards the north and west, though, an increasing risk of some showers.
What does it take to become a top opera star like tenor Jonas Kaufmann, Welsh bass baritone Sabryn Terfel, and Greek-American soprano Maria Callas? I'm on a mission to find out how opera is trying to attract new audiences and reinvent itself.
I think music has the power to change the world.
Take me to the opera. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Travelling can be so much more than a holiday.
It's about diving headfirst into new experiences.
And seeing the world with fresh eyes.
Where each destination tells a unique story.
And every encounter brings a new perspective.
Because all of these amazing places are made so much richer by the people who live in them.
So unleash your spirit of adventure.
And join us for a deeper understanding of the world.
The Travel Show. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Today at 1, a landmark report into gender services says young people are being let down by lack of medical research and fear of open debate. The report questions the long-term impact of puberty blockers and other hormone treatment and says that more holistic care is needed. And the other main stories on today's programme. The murder of 4-week-old Ollie Davis. His father is jailed for a minimum of 22 years. Showing off some of the proceeds of a £54 million benefit fraud, a gang of Bulgarian nationals is convicted of the largest scam of its kind in England and Wales. And in a break with a century-old tradition, there'll be prize money for gold medal athletes at this year's Paris Olympics.
Coming up in sport on BBC News, Aston Villa forward Rachel Daly, part of England's Euro 2022 winning side, announces her retirement from international football.
Good afternoon. A major report into gender services for young people says that medical interventions given to the under-18s are based on remarkably weak evidence. The report's author, Dr. Hilary Cass, says the long-term impact of using puberty blockers and hormones, which make people's appearance either more masculine or more feminine, is uncertain and should only be given with extreme caution. She suggests that young people who are questioning their gender might be having their other healthcare issues, such as autism or mental health, overlooked. The report stresses it's not intended to undermine trans identities, but to improve the care of the growing number of children and young people with gender-related distress. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
It's a landmark review with the stark conclusion that children had been let down because of remarkably weak evidence on medical interventions in gender care. This final report follows an interim review which has already led to major changes. Gender services provided by the controversial Tavistock Clinic in London ended last month. 2 new centres in London and Liverpool have been set up. The use of drugs to stop the onset of puberty has now stopped until further research is done. The author of the report says hormone treatment should in future be used with extreme caution for 16 to 18-year-olds. And argues that children were let down by the quality of services.
It is unusual for us to give a potentially life-changing treatment to young people and not know what happens to them in adulthood, and that's been a particular problem, that we haven't had the follow-up into adulthood to know what the results of this are. And that's the reason why I've said that we must improve the research base here.
Kira Bell started taking puberty blockers aged 16 after being referred to the Tavistock. She then took legal action, arguing she wasn't challenged enough at the clinic and regretted her decision. Her lawyer responded to the review findings.
Whilst it is very reassuring for young people who are going through gender questioning at the moment and their parents, that hopefully there will be a new service developed that will meet their needs appropriately, it is unfortunately for many young people too late. They live with the ongoing consequences of poor clinical treatment and their lives forever changed.
Expanding gender services is another key focus of this review. Recommendations include a separate pathway for young children and their families, allowing early discussions to take place, a follow-through service for 17 to 25-year-olds, and assurances that the same standards of care as other parts of the NHS will be provided. Sonia wanted to transition from the age of 15, but she found she couldn't get access to care and was put on a waiting list. By the age of 18, she hadn't had a first appointment and was transferred to adult services. After hearing there'd be another long wait, she opted to go private until she could be seen by the NHS. Sonia says the long delays were hard to cope with, but she hopes there'll soon be changes.
Hopefully, with the review and its findings, the young trans people of today and the next generations can have a more human and a more